Earlier this year, a documentary called Women in Dictatorship Beyond the Myth of Emancipation by journalist Fatmira Nikoli was screened, highlighting how Albania's repressive communist regime falsely claimed it gave women freedom by allowing them education and employment. Now, this is something I've often heard both from supporters and opposers of communism, and that is that women during the rule of Enver Hoxha had equal rights and freedoms in many ways more than now. Now people talk about women being employed, state childcare, equality, but I'm not really convinced on this, and I wanted to find out a bit more about the reality. And I'm joined in the studio today by Jonila Godole, who's an author, scholar, journalist, translator, and an expert on memory studies. You're also the Executive Director of the Institute for Democracy, Media and Culture. I'm also joined by Hannah Chenna, who's an artist and an activist with the Habit Collective. Welcome to you both.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
So we're going to start by talking about this myth of women's emancipation during communism, and then we're going to move on to the modern day and the situation as it stands now. Jonila, can we talk a bit about where this idea of women being emancipated during communism has come from? Is it a myth? Was it a reality?
Oh, there are a lot of myths about the dictatorship. Some of them, one of them is the emancipation of women. Other is that the education was better in that time, or the food was better, and there were no criminality in comparison to today, and a lot of other myths. We had a scientific conference, international conference, 2 years ago on myths of communism, who are still alive until now. And one of the myths was the emancipation of women. And after that, the documentary of, we just produced a documentary with Fatmira Nikoli. And that was interesting during the documentary too, as we were working for the documentary, just to see, what is that, this kind of myth of emancipation. We had a lot of interviews and archive documents, these archive documents and film documents from the archive of film just showed just the opposite. But of course it was a lot of propaganda. So it is a myth, as in the modern times and in the modern democratic country, there were always movements where the women just fought for their rights. And in Albania, after the liberation war, there were this kind of emancipation, which was like a gift given to the women. So it was not fought for that. And it looks like it was an emancipation, but we have to admit that it is very complex. It is a complex thema. After the liberation war, the illiteracy, the literacy of the people was, of course, massive, and it was done a lot for the education, so that the people are more literate after that. And it is a fact too that it was a massive employment of women after 1945, but that was the emancipation. Was like I see it, was a side effect. Was a side effect of a lot of policies during that time under the communist regime. So the women were like a workforce. They were treated like a workforce more than that a modern woman like we have today that can choose the job, the profession, and the work. So it was mandatory. You had to work. And for the communist regime, it was important to have every workforce, men and women, just to work for they said in the time, or the propaganda of the time was for the industrialization of the country, so everybody was needed, but that is for me, of course, it is a kind of emancipation when we compare from what time the women came and what kind of culture, very traditional culture that we have here, but that was not so easy. So there were a lot of women who couldn't study, a lot of women who were just in the internment camps, And in the archive materials, of course, we didn't find any evidence about that. So everything was beautifully the facade of all the women,
Happy women
just
working in the
sitting,
fields.
happy women with a tractor in the agriculture, happy women just in the congresses of the party with the leader, and always happy faces of these women. So for me, it was the masculization during the 45 years of dictatorship of the women. So in all the professions and jobs that they just had to do in that time, it was mandatory, the work, just working in three at day, at night, and then after that it was a burden, because the women in this traditional culture, which did not change after the liberation war, so they had to work, but they had to do all the work at home and the child care. So it was a double burden
job.
and double job for the women. So this is what I see, but what we never talk about, it is what about the women which who were really educated in the 30s, educated in Italy or in other countries, or even in Albania, and the most of them, since the first years after the liberation war, they got executed or put in prison or internment. We know some of them: Sabia Kasimati, Musineko Kalari, Zurika Mano, who was executed, but we have more than 7,000 women among 35,000 of political prisoners. They were women, 7,000, and more than 300 women. Their bones, their body was never found until now. They were executed or died in prison. Nobody was talking about that. So when I hear today, so it was 45 years of emancipation, and the women have the rights, and I say, no, my mother, it is very personal now, the personal story, but my mother, she couldn't study. She was coming from a family with maybe biography Tekesha, with a bad biography, from a rich family and from a kulak family, and so she was not allowed to go to university and to study, and maybe the same fate I would have had it if the regime was not collapsing.
So it was nothing
in
to
1990.
do with,
So
it was nothing to do with what women wanted. It was nothing to do with them standing and saying, you know, this is what we want to go to work, we want to go. It was forced upon them, and only if they were considered worthy enough to receive it. If not, they were sent to internment camps or executed.
yes, you had to be loyal to the party, loyal to the ideology, the communist ideology, and if you were born, or if you were by coincidence part of the enemy family, then you saw what was the emancipation of the women. I'm not talking only about the violence that we had, or a lot of women who came out of the prisons, and after the 90s, they told about the violation and rapes in the prisons, and or even during interrogations. But we are talking about this propaganda of emancipation of women, which was really, in the communist ideology, very important to talk about the equality of men and women, but that was a propaganda, because that was not true. So this is, for me, one of the biggest myths that we have from the dictatorship, and that the women in that time, they were sometimes they were a facade. So we had a few women which really had a career, even in the highest position in the politics in that time. But they were mostly the women of the men, of the important and these powerful men. So it is really very rare that you have women coming from other families to have this important task. Sometimes you have women like Lenka Truko, for example, she didn't have a degree, a gymnasium degree, a high school degree, but she got a degree in the School of Politics, in the party school, and then was a minister and important. So coming from the agriculture, without any diploma and degree, just being a minister in that time, just to show that loyalty get paid. So if you are loyal, you just can have a career even in the politics.
So even that was propaganda.
Even that was propaganda, and it is this kind of tokens we can say for women, which is still today. So you have this facade of women, which are mostly the facade of this very Stalinistic dictatorship and regime that we have in Albania. So you don't really have the women which were critical, or you have some of them which, for example, Edi Luarasi, which about her we were talking in the documentary, and she was an artist, and then she was critical, or the regime just thought she was critical, then they banned her. She couldn't do her art anymore, and one of the best actors that we had in Albania in that time. But most of the others, they were just playing the game. So to be on the secure side in that time. So yeah.
It was a facade. So now, obviously, property rights, I think during communism, there wasn't really such a thing for women to have property rights because everything was owned by the state, essentially. So
it was not only for women, it was for all
men
the society.
As well. So what about things like divorce, abortion? Were these permitted? Were women able to make choices like that for themselves?
No, in former communist countries, so in Eastern Europe, in Albania, like in Romania and other countries, the state had the full control over your body as a woman too. So
still happens today in some countries in Europe.
Yeah, still not in Albania so much anymore. It is not that it was not abortion at that time, but it was illegal. Yes. A lot of women died during this very bad conditions in which the abortion was done in the time, and the state was just controlling the birth, and was not allowed. So you didn't have any control of your body, what you do, and if you were labeled as an enemy, then you were stigmatized as without moral too. So for a lot of women, so it was not only you have not moral in politics, so you are the enemy, but even you just have no moral as a human, as a woman. It was mostly for the women, so that were a lot of stigma in the time, and it was how can we talk about emancipation in the time?
Yes.
It is crazy. Yeah.
Now, we had the transition to democracy. Albania has been a democracy for 30-something years. How have things progressed since then? Because the moment communism ended, there's absolutely no way that this stigma, this mentality, this sort of system just came to a dead end. It must have taken time to change, to evolve. How are things now? Have we made progress? Have we made progress quick enough? What's your view on this, knowing what you do about communism?
Yeah, of course we have made progress. Albania is a fragile democracy until now, and the society, it is not really open. We do not have a very open society, even if we play like that, and it is. I see a lot of changes. Of course, this has nothing to do with the politics here. It has to do with the zeitgeist, with the spirit of time, and the development of women, and a lot of movements which were done in the European countries, in the Western world, and so this has an impact in Albania too. Of course, the civil society, a lot of NGOs working with the issues of gender equality of women. They have done a lot of work, of course, and very positive work in 30 years. But I think that we still have a very traditional society, and that it is difficult for women. I'm not talking about Tirana. It is difficult. It is different in the capital. So you can raise your child alone and have a job. This is a burden, of course, but you can do it without being so much stigmatized. But we are not talking here about the smaller cities or the the villages or areas where this is impossible still now. So yeah, and the immigration, of course, changed a lot. The free market, so that you can have now a job, a career, the work that you decide by yourself. But even this, I think it is much more difficult in Albania as when you go in other countries. But of course, even in Western countries, women are just dealing, like always, with not the same salaries, and not for the same positions, and so the problems are always there for women. Maybe we just learn to live with these problems and to have that. I remember, as I was a very young journalist, since I was 18 in the beginning of the 90s, we were only 3 women, young women, in the newspaper in that time, in Kohayon. And that was really difficult, just to do your job, or just to decide if you are gonna work for politics. I was a journalist for politics, and everybody was expecting a man doing that job. And I never saw myself, I never identified myself with the gender in the work, but with you have to be a professionist. So
Yes.
you have to be professional. It has nothing to do if you are a man or woman. But that was not very accepted in that time. So yeah, but that was another time, I thought. And of course, like you had in 30 years the sexual harassment, which was never issued and never was spoken openly in this country. This is a taboo. It is a taboo topic until today. And as I said before, we just learned maybe to handle all these difficulties, and just to do our work. And but of course, it is not the same. So I am positive about the future, that we have a young generation. I see it with my students, with my daughter, and they have another mentality. And I see it with the male students, and with the younger generation of men, which really have learned from some of the mistakes maybe of their parents, of their fathers and grandfathers. And let's hope for the future to be better. But what it lacks for me here, it is that we have a lot of women in high positions, maybe in the businesses, in the private market, and we have women in politics. But I do see a path of dependency from the past, so that they are just used for the facade more than they are just to stay there for a different kind of politics. So I haven't seen until now women that they just talk really openly and fight against corruption from their colleagues, the male colleagues. I just see them as to be loyal to the leaders, so that they become the positions that they have. So it is really pity that I do not see any bigger differences. And every woman who is a strong woman and has the own opinion about things, which sometimes is not the same what the leader or the director or the boss of a company is saying, always it is a problem, and they do not have the chance to get promoted in the career. So this is something which we have to work still.